And it says that illusion reflects itself on the water of the mind. Just like when you go to a lake, a placid lake, very calm, placid lake, and if there's a tree growing on the bank of the lake, you can see the reflection of the lake, of the tree in the lake. I'm just testing you. Make sure everyone's listening attentively. So the tree, which is otherwise upright, when reflected on the water, it's upside down. So there it says that the illusion reflects itself on the water of the mind. And in this way, that which is not there becomes real. And we'll come back to that as soon as I tell the story from a cinema theater. People still do that? Go to theaters? I guess when they premiere movies, right? They don't. That's the only way you would know. Okay, me either. Last time I went to one was like 30 plus years ago. But anyhow, what's happening in the theater, well, actually I don't know what's happening these days, but in the old times they used to project the image onto a screen. And so the room had to be dark, and the image was projected with the projector onto the screen. And so in this way you could watch the movie. And while watching the movie, what happens is that you sort of suspend your critical sense of reality. You suspend it. Otherwise, you could not really experience the movie. If a person falls in love in the movie, right, and then their heart gets broken, and you ought to experience that. You look at the person, you identify with the person. So when the person undergoes, I remember a few, like it was really painful. Like poor guy, poor girl, heart's broken. Oh, I really felt the pain. But if you were to think, they're just actors. They're just. If you ever seen how a movie is shot, next time you see a movie, count how long each scene lasts before camera shows a different angle. It takes about 3 seconds. Every 3 seconds, things are changed. That means that the actors, for the most part, act only as long as 3 seconds. There's some long shots and so on, but on average, it's like 3 seconds. I know because I shot few short films. And so it's a complete illusion. If you were to be aware of what's going on, you could not experience the movie. So, again, I heard that they don't project movies anymore. They just play them on a big screen, but I don't know. I wouldn't know. But in the case of projecting a movie onto the screen, if someone stands up in the theater and blocks the light that projects the image onto the screen, everyone gets very upset. And they shout and yell and throw things and threaten and stuff like that. And even worse, if someone turns the light on, then everything's ruined. The whole thing collapses. Go on, man, you just like destroy the experience. And while watching the movie, I mean, I remember some of the films that I saw. I literally experienced what was going on in the movie, and so I identified with these actors, and not with the actors, but with the roles they were playing. I knew they were just acting it out, but I would identify with them so bad, so much, that I would experience their pains and pleasures. So, to go back to the analogy of the tree reflecting on the water, or illusion reflecting on the water of the mind, in a similar way, for illusion to exist, there has to be darkness, and illusion has to reflect itself on something, and it reflects itself on the mind. And so as it reflects itself on the mind, we identify ourselves with the illusory created world. And so whatever goes on in the world in this illusory world, imaginary world, we identify with it, and we experience pains and pleasures. Just like I read an article, I don't know whether it was fictitious, but even if it was, doesn't matter. Sometimes websites publish things just to get attention, and it described a guy who, in his illusion, in his, I guess we could say, madness, he thought himself to be Prince Charles. He thought himself to be Prince Charles, you know, the British fellow. And so when the Diane unfortunately passed away, he literally felt the pain, thinking himself to be Prince Charles. And so similarly, as we identify with the reflection of the self, called the physical body, we undergo fictitious pains and pleasures due to this identification. So we tend to think that our value is determined by the color of our hair, by the length of our nose, by the sleekness of our legs. By the way, I remember once I was in India, and big, giant, chicken-like looking bird, which I didn't even know what it was. It just looked like a tremendously oversized chicken. Came out of nowhere, and then it was followed by another one of the same kind. And then a friend of mine, he joked, as if the birds were speaking. So one bird was saying to another, of course it was the friend talking to me, he said, "You have such sexy legs." But, you know, from our human perspective, they didn't look too sexy. So what does the sexiness of it depends upon? Depends on the illusion of false ego. What physical form do you identify yourself with? If you identify yourself with the tremendously oversized chicken bird, then you would find those legs very sexy, probably. Confirmed. But if you identify yourself with a dog, then you would think this is a beautiful lunch here. So what is a sexual object to one being is lunch to another. And it depends on this thing called ahankara, or false ego. Ahankara is a technical yoga term, which means aham means I, that I have become something. The spiritual teachings begin with the basic lesson that the identity of the self is spiritual, and the spirit soul has a physical body that changes, right? Changes in due course of time. But the self, the soul, stays the same. And so as the self identifies with these temporary forms, like if you're in a human body, you identify, you say, yes, I'm a human. So due to this identification or misidentification, you get a set of certain values, and you live out illusory pains and pleasures, which are unnecessary. For example, what is, and I'll end here, what is capitalism? Capitalism is an ism. It is an ism, it is a worldview, it is a philosophy that tells you that the greatest private and public acquisition is capital, which means everything else is second place. This is a concomitant, this is a natural result of thinking oneself to be a physical creation rather than spiritual. You tend to think that your well-being lies in acquisition of matter, or it's defined in physical terms. But what does this capitalism say without speaking. It says that if the capital is the first thing, that means that everything else is at best second placed. And so therefore there is a moral justification for being a pig. To promote one's own personal material benefit over that of another. And it gives one psychological license to be abusive. This is just one product of materialistic consciousness or identification of the soul with the physical body. Nearly every evil we can think of is a result of this. Even sometimes people speak of religious wars. They're not religious wars, they're wars of false egos again. Just people who think they're spiritual. I really cannot think of any other evil, any other source of every evil that I ever heard of besides this. Today we talked a little bit about it at Mesa College. The other result of thinking oneself to be a physical body are differences, because no physical body is equal. So you tend to think that differences are fundamental. And yet, at the same time, everyone's so powerful, especially in modern times. Never before, like in modern times, people yearning so strongly for equality, justice, and so on. But how do you establish equality on the physical plane, when physically everyone's so terribly different? But the spiritual worldview, where you identify yourself with a soul that has a body, then equality is fundamental. And differences are just peripheral. Then I don't have to be envious that you have a prettier hair than me. So, but the whole illusion rests on darkness, right? Like you have to close yourself to even contemplate the idea that perhaps I'm of a different creation than physical. That's the darkness. The screen is the mind, and the reflection is physical. And in this way, one's experiencing the illusion of a materialistic movie. And thus experiences literally pains and pleasures which are superfluous, unnecessary. So, spooky tune, sobering message, what's up? Forgive me.